Hey there, and welcome to Effin' Fridays with Francine, the podcast where we blend spirituality, entrepreneurship, and a whole lot of fun. I'm Francine Tirrell, owner of Forever Changed Coaching. I'm a spiritual mindset coach helping women make big ass up levels in their business and their life. I'm your host, and every Friday we're here to light up your day with lively conversations with amazing humans who are shaking things up and making the world a better place. Get ready for laughter, inspiring stories, and a good dose of positivity as we chat with healers, dreamers, artists, coaches, and visionaries who are bringing their unique magic to the world. If you love mixing a bit of soul with a whole lot of joy, you are in the right spot. So grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and let's hang out together. Welcome to Effin' Fridays with Francine, where we are going to have some fun. Hello, and happy Friday. I say this every week, but it's so true. I'm super excited about today's episode. I have my friend Maria with us here today. Maria Natobov is a step parenting expert and trusted advisor to divorce professionals, financial advisors, and parenting coaches. She offers a caring and playful coaching approach, empowering clients to blend their families with joy and confidence. I love that. As a daughter of divorced immigrant parents and a step parent herself, she understands the unique communication challenges in blended families and the importance of innovative support systems. Using her signature four-step energy focus process and rapid resolution therapy, Maria helps step parents and divorced parents transition from chaos to harmony. She strengthens caregivers' values, fosters partner alignment, and builds trust with stepchildren. Maria has supported numerous families through her VIP step parenting breakthrough model and her podcast, Synergistic Step Parenting, which you can learn more at synergisticstepparenting.com. Maria, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Me too. So Maria and I met, I don't know, sometime earlier this year, where she reached out to me on LinkedIn. And of course, I get like, all right, who wants to sell me something, right? Because that's what we get. And then we got on a call and then we talked, I don't know, forever. And then we met in person a few times. And I just love your energy. And I'm so
Oh.
excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, right back at you. Can I just say, yes, we're like kindred spirits. It was
Yes,
awesome.
absolutely. I love this because I am a child of divorced parents, and my parents got divorced when I was 15. And as an adult, I would say to you, they had an amazing divorce. When I've done some inner child work, my 15-year-old self does not necessarily feel that way, but I really appreciate how my parents tried to normalize, just because they weren't in love anymore didn't mean they didn't love us.
Mhm.
And, my dad and his girlfriend and my mom and her fiance, we would have holidays together. And it was very normal for all the parents to be there. And when my mom passed away, my dad was there with it. Like it was family, right?
Yeah,
Because they had three children.
that's so
And
beautiful.
it really was. And, when I see other people having, the I hate them, I hate, he, she, all the things, I'm
Mhm.
like, but you have children, right?
Yeah,
Like get
exactly.
over that. So talk us through, I mean, obviously I shared a little bit in your intro, but talk us through like how you got to this, because this is a beautiful niche where you're at.
Thank you. Yeah, so strangely enough, I'm an immigrant, which weirdly has a lot to do with being a step parent or in a blended family. You're like a fish out of water, which is really similar to, I think, both of those experiences. And I'm a child of divorce. My parents had a very tumultuous relationship as far back as like probably before I was born. And it was surprising how long they stayed married, considering that. And when we immigrated, when I was 8 years old, shortly thereafter, my dad left, but they didn't get divorced officially until I was 13. And I think that there was a lot of let's try to make it work for the child, but kids pick up on all of the stuff, right? So there's really anybody in a similar boat. My best advice is don't stay together, quote unquote, for the kids because you're not doing anybody any favors, and your kids are picking up
And
on a framework that
100%.
doesn't work,
I
right? And
picked
then they're
up on
gonna,
stuff. I knew what was going on in my parents' really. I
yeah,
mean, I would listen to them fight. Like you feel the energy
oh
of it.
yeah,
And then I wanted to know more. I mean,
right,
I was 15, 14. I was sneaking around and looking through drawers and trying to figure
right,
shit out.
right. And moreover, kids are actually basing like they're picking up on the role modeling, right? So whatever is going on, especially in their relationship between their two biological parents, if that is not if there's coldness, if there's distance, if something isn't working and there's a lot of conflict or resistance, they're picking up on that and likely they're going to inject those same patterns into their own relationships, not on purpose. It's
Right.
it's just the way that it works. So I strongly encourage people to consider all of that as well as they are navigating their decisions. But yeah, so that was obviously both of those things made a lasting impact. But as well as my first marriage was abusive. It was an unhealthy relationship, which looking back at my childhood, I'm like, I kind of get it.
Right.
And it took me a while to realize that and really make sense of it and recognize, okay, we need a break. We need to leave. We were together for way too long as it was. And then I met my husband and he had a daughter. And I tried my best to talk him out of dating me, but he wouldn't listen. So I became a step parent. And then 5 years in, she revealed that she was being abused and neglected by bio mom. At the time, she was living with bio mom during the weekend. We had her every weekend. So she came to live with us full time. I was holding space for her, even though bio mom wasn't in the picture at that point in time, holding space for that relationship, but kind of a caregiver, right? Like full-time caregiver along with my husband to my stepdaughter. And
Can
um,
I just ask, how was
yeah,
and I'm thinking of a family member that I know, right? That
yeah.
their mom was not in the picture. And
Hmm.
when their stepmom became the picture, a lot of the resentment they had for mom not being in the picture was geared towards stepmom, right?
Yeah.
How was that you stepping into that role?
Yeah, I think it was very convoluted for her. And the reason is that she had a lot of love for me because we had already for 5 years been cultivating a really beautiful relationship, but she was also like told negative things about me and it was confusing.
Sure.
And I do think that me being like full-time mom role, like quote unquote, I think that there was some transference of that frustration, but also like kind of a big ball of like yarn that she
Yeah.
couldn't
But
fully
you had already been
untangle.
laying the foundation.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I really tried my best not to overstep, but I mean, I definitely made a lot of mistakes. I mean, I had no idea what I
I
was
mean,
doing.
all parents. I do not have children, but I know
Long
all parents make mistakes, right?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I did obviously get certifications, which helped, but certainly, I mean, I'm just so grateful for this work because I learned what the things that I really needed that I didn't know. And it allowed me for that opportunity and to make sense of, again, just looking back at my past and really like fitting the pieces together to recognize how I got there and what happened with my parents and then how my childhood had set me up for either some things that weren't working very well or that were working really well and just really making a lot of sense out of that, which is why when I initially became a full-time mom, essentially, right? Or when she started living with us full-time, I joined blended family support groups on Facebook because I was like, okay, like who else is navigating this? We need advice. And what I didn't realize is even though people weren't dealing with something similar to our circumstance, just the idea of blending, people were really struggling on both sides, whether they
Mm.
were the biological parent with a new partner or whether they were the new partner coming into the picture. And they were talking about feeling like an outsider in their own home and having so much conflict and so much heartache and not really just feeling overwhelmed, not knowing where to turn. And at that point, I realized, okay, I've gained some skills along the way that I've been taking for granted throughout all of my life experiences, and that they've really were serving me, even though it was an extremely difficult time for us. And I was like, okay, I think this would be useful for others based on what I'm seeing from people's shares. And that's how synergistic step parenting was born.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm curious, why do you think, right, and maybe from your experience, that the bio parents will badmouth the step parent? And
I
I mean, is it
yeah,
both ways? I mean, it feels like the step parent's not bad-mouthing the bio parent, but
I
does it
think
go
it
both ways?
yeah, I think it really depends on the
Okay.
situation. And I think that they're sort of set up sometimes to be adversaries from the get-go, right? Like culturally, when we think about the notion of a step parent, it's not a very positive light. I
Right.
think there's
Wicked
been more
stepmother. Yeah.
positive, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
been more positive examples more recently, but generally speaking, and we've grown up with that, right? And all the
Right.
fairy tales of like it's always the wicked stepmom or you know,
Yeah.
and then I think also that there's a lot of pressure and there's also a lot of insecurity of like, is this person coming to take my place? And I think in the beginning, nobody can really answer that because they're not
Mm,
intending to, but there's this phenomenon that can happen where the step parent coming in is like, oh, it's a big responsibility. I need to step into the shoes and I need to do my part, right? And they don't realize that actually their part is not to be the parent. But
right.
it's a lot of gray areas. It's a lot of nuanced, challenging things to figure out. They're really big and making sense of it all takes time. And again, I really didn't know what I was doing. I had some things like just I was a nurturer by nature. So I think in some ways that kind of served me and because I've been through challenges, I could relate to, hey, this is tough, right? Like
Yeah.
because I was a child of divorce, I could really empathize with my stepdaughter. But I can't tell you that that necessarily led me to make better decisions in some respects. No, it did not. And I have a lot of regrets of how I handled things.
It's it's interesting. One of the things that comes to mind is as adults, my sister and I were having a conversation, and if I was 15, she was probably 13 when my
Mhm.
parents got divorced, and she said, I thought it was my fault. And I was
Yeah,
like,
that's so
what did
common.
you were 13, you were a kid. What do you
Yeah.
think you did? That was fascinating to me when I
Yes.
heard that, right?
That's
So,
such a common one. And actually, most kids will blame themselves.
yeah.
And it takes many, many, many iterations for them to understand that it's not their fault. And if there's any conflict or tension between the bio parents, there's still kind of fertile ground for that blame to flourish,
Why do
even
you
in spite
think
of that.
why do you think kids transfer that I'm going to call it blame to
Yeah.
themselves?
Well, I think because kids are young and at that stage in their life, their whole world is very like they have a difficult time thinking outside of themselves
Yeah,
already. So that's one piece, but also because our mind is so powerful, it's constantly creating stories. Let's be
right.
real, right? There's so
Well,
many things
what I
that
work with my clients on, yes,
right?
100%.
It doesn't serve us, and
Right.
it's not a choice either. We're not purposely creating it, but we're trying to make sense of a situation. And when we don't have the facts and when no one is sitting down with us and trying to um, giving us a powerful context or giving us any information that would make sense or help us to process what's happening, we're going to fill in the blanks ourselves. So it's very natural to go to self-blame.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What are some tips that you share with parents on how to help kids navigate that? Because I would imagine part of your work is also helping the child navigate the
absolutely.
change.
Yeah, so I think a big thing that we focus on, because a lot of times people will be like, oh, my kid is acting up, like fix my kid. And it's like, well, let's look at what's happening in your world because very likely something is happening in the environment that is having an impact on the child, right? Because I say all behavior is communication.
Mm,
So when there is, whether it's passive aggressiveness, like a rude attitude, or other forms of possibly, aggressive behavior or kind of disconnect, possibly like holding up or keeping distant or keeping quiet, or maybe like sort of like a low, like not a very cheery affect or any of those things, right? Like they could be pointing to something's going on. And it could be possibly in the particular household. So maybe it has to do with the new partner or just like confusion, or it could be something else. It could be something going on at the other parent's house, or maybe it's just something going on at school, or maybe it's just the situation in and of itself. Kids very commonly take a long time to process and make sense of divorce and even coming to terms with the fact that their parents are not going to reconcile. It just takes them longer. Not all kids, there's not cold hard rules around this or
Sure.
time frames,
Yeah.
but it really does take them a lot longer than it does the parents. The parents are like ready to move on, right? Like they've made their decision, they're kind of excited about dating again, et cetera, and moving their life forward. Or at least typically one of the parents is. But for the kids, it just takes a lot longer. So it's really valuable to have the conversations with a child. Now, I don't mean share all the details. That is not at
Right.
all what I'm saying.
Mom's gonna go out and have sex tonight.
Right.
You're
Like
gonna stay
not
with the
at
babysitter.
all. Yes. And not even like mom's going to go and like have some fun dating because they might
Right.
not be ready to hear that.
Yeah.
And I always advise that if they are thinking seriously about dating, or maybe they've met somebody and they're feeling that it's serious, feel out your child and say, what do you think about me dating?
Yeah.
Because they likely have strong emotions around it. And so creating that space for them to reflect, for them to know what's coming down the pike, for them to be able to make sense of it and, ask questions and, really just creating space for that open communication. And here's the thing that most folks don't realize is it's not enough to say you can always come and talk to me. Like kids are just not going to. You have to kind
Right.
of have some skin in the game. So by that I mean you have to sort of like not like tell one on yourself, but you sort of have to like share something that shows that you understand their world.
Well,
Maybe like share an anecdote from when you were young, or like a
right.
friend of yours was going through that, or maybe a friend of yours now, like they have kids who are going through this, and maybe something comes to mind and it's like, yeah, Timmy is feeling this way. Like, what about you? How is this going for you? Just kind of show them that you want to know and that you've bothered to really consider their experience.
And with everything, it's age appropriate too, right? What
Totally,
you're going to say to a
100%.
6-year-old versus a 17-year-old are two different
Yes,
conversations.
absolutely.
Um, what about, so I'm just going to go back to my situation. So my mom's
Yeah.
dad left when she was 5, and my
Okay.
aunt was 5 weeks old and like was
Wow.
not in the picture,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
So being a coach and somebody who's done a lot of therapy, that created how my mother and my aunt grew up and how they showed up as adults and the whole bit,
Hmm.
right? They didn't
Hmm.
have the skills. And my grandmother was so angry, I think she waited 25 years to actually divorce him. And he
Wow.
has a child. Oh, he's passed, but he had a child in between my aunt and my mom,
Okay.
right? So there's, and
Hmm.
the Italians, you're dead to me, right? Like you're dead to me.
Hmm.
So I'm going to make you suffer. So I don't know that my mom had the skill set because she never learned it,
Yeah.
right? Like to
Yeah.
my knowledge, never did therapy, never,
Yeah.
coaching was not even, I
Yeah.
don't
A
even know if
thing.
coaching was
Yeah.
around 40, however many
Yeah.
years ago. But so she wouldn't have had the skill set to actually even
Yeah.
have the conversations. And, I laugh now because my mother was 38 when my parents got divorced. Of
Yeah.
course, as a 15-year-old, she was old.
Hmm.
And I remember one day she was going out, and I can, like, clear as day, I can picture she was in a red halter top.
Wow.
Let's just say I did not say anything flattering. And I think I might have gotten a slap across the face. But it was me, like in hindsight, I can see
Mhm.
it was me acting out, right?
Mhm.
I actually said to her, "You look like a slut." She didn't, right?
Right.
As an adult now, she was a 38-year-old woman going out with her
Right.
friends,
Right.
right?
Right.
But as a 15 or 16, however old I was at the time, my mother
Yeah.
was going out,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So are you working with the parent? Because a lot of the parents that you're working with, right, they may not be divorced if they actually were able to
Yes.
communicate, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean,
Yes.
I was a professional matchmaker. I was a date and relationship coach. I've
Yeah.
worked on mindset and work on relationships. Often people aren't willing to be vulnerable, right? When
Hmm.
I was doing matchmaking, I would say 95% of the people that I I spoke with, and I
Mm,
spoke with thousands over 3 years, were getting divorced because they just didn't have anything in common, just fell out of love.
yeah,
It wasn't because there was infidelity or
right.
alcohol or addiction or anything like that. It's because people don't know how to communicate. So if
Yes.
you can't communicate with your partner, how then are you learning to communicate with your child?
Yeah, absolutely huge. And we talk a lot about past patterns, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to, because to your point, and this is why I love this work. I feel like it's such a beautiful opportunity, right? Like whatever happened, it didn't work out. It's everything's cracked open. And so now the ground is fertile for really taking a long, hard look at what was working, what wasn't working, and gaining some new skills and building different patterns, right? Different patterns of communicating, different patterns of self-care, different patterns of maybe even considering like creating those opportunities for connection, right? Like to your point, I go out to dinner and we see so many families and everyone's on their phones and they're not talking at
Right.
all.
Yeah. Yep.
Like,
See
and it's
couples
this
doing that too, right? Yeah.
literally
My husband and I
exactly.
get caught doing it every once in a while. I'm like, all right, put our phones away.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to, right? And especially when you're surrounded by it, it's easy to
Right.
kind of fall into that pattern. But the reality is that when you're intentional about what you're creating, you have a different experience. And so
Mm.
I really believe it's an opportunity, right? Like it's truly an opportunity to build some skills, look at what are strengths and just build on those. That's a lot of times how I approach work with my clients as well. And certainly we know we review their goals and what they would, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And what they would like to have happen. So certainly that's a big part of it as well.
Do you mostly work with the step parent or do you work with both parents? And have you ever worked with both parents of a
Yes.
divorce so that they
Well,
have a
so I so far actually it's so funny that you're saying this because I just recently am pursuing a new certification and I'm extremely excited about it because it actually teaches the co-parents who are getting
Mm.
divorced, which very commonly just the system itself and the process will very often set them up as adversaries. And they also just automatically like there's so much shame and guilt in the whole process. And it really feels like, oh my gosh, I did absolutely everything wrong and I can't get anything right. And I'm a horrible person and I'm a horrible
Yeah.
parent and it's awful and everything is dismal. And what is so beautiful about this process, it's created by Trina Knudsen. It's called BeH2O, and it stands for beryllium and water because beryllium is a resilient, strong metal, and water
Okay.
is fluid, and you kind of need both. And I absolutely love it, but it's brilliant because it's a 16-week program that is a hybrid of classes and individual sessions with the two, the couple or former couple and myself as the facilitator. And we literally work through how to have a respectful relationship and it's in the process. So
Mm.
through that they learn how to acknowledge each other for their strengths and recognize that even though my co-parent may be making different decisions than I would and maybe I don't agree with them, but giving my child a varied experience is only going to benefit them, right? It just creates a more rich experience and a learning educational like exposure opportunities for them and for them to be flexible and for them to know that there's more than one way to approach something. And that is beautiful. And so, really recognizing what deserves that attention to have a conversation about it, to address it, to resolve it, versus what can just be let go as and embraced as this is a varied experience for my child. This is an opportunity for them to learn how to be flexible, right? And how to I don't know, do something in a different way, approach something in a different way, or
Yeah.
problem solve something in a different way. But most importantly, what's really beautiful about this process is it literally builds it helps them to shift their paradigm to respect and appreciate those aspects of each other and to build a parenting plan, including communication strategies, conflict resolution, like what would require a conversation or decision making together or whatnot, and what to do if they can't get on the same page about something. They are the ones creating it, and they're creating it based on their values, based on their goals, based on what is most important for them to impart on their children, which is so beautiful and moving and powerful. And then those things become the guidepost that they can always rely on as they navigate different things. Because let's face it, life is always throwing something new at
Right.
us.
Well, and here's the thing. If you have children, getting divorced without children is a lot different than getting divorced with children, right?
Yes.
Like without children, like you can never see each other again, right?
Yes.
But when you have children, you are in each other's lives. You're
Yeah,
in weddings
100%.
and
There's no,
graduations
yeah,
and
there's no being
grandchildren and
divorced.
yeah,
There's no being divorced from parenting. And
right,
exactly like, do you want your kid to feel like you're putting them in the middle? Or
right,
like there's tension, like, oh, I need to choose which parent I invite because they can't be in the same room together because they don't want the drama,
right.
or they're gonna like ruin or something, right? Like instead, don't you just want to be able to contribute in a positive way to your child's, whatever the milestone is that they're celebrating, or an event, or happy occasion, or, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I mean, life is just going to be, like you said, like full of those moments. So, and I also think just on a personal level, when you live with all that resentment, all that
I was just like,
anger,
I was like holding on to that, what
it's
that
so
does for
heavy.
you.
It
Yes.
destroys you. It like decays you from the inside out. And I know
Yes.
as an energy healer, you
Yeah.
know all
I
about
know. I was like,
that.
I was feeling it as you were saying it. I was like, oh my God, imagine holding
Right?
on to all that anger. And at some point, you don't even know why you're angry anymore.
Right,
You're
exactly. And
just holding on to it.
it's in your every ounce of being. It's in your expression. It's in
Right.
your physical, like it's in your facial expression. It's in your demeanor. It's just now you're that. You are that
Yeah.
anger. You are that resentment. And so that's the biggest, I think, gift that a parent can give themselves and their children is to find a way to release that,
Yeah.
right?
And
Just
what comes to me as we're talking about that, right? Like that's the
mhm.
energy that they're putting out. That's the vibration. So what they're getting in return in their new relationships is the same, right? Like the
Right,
same because that's the
exactly.
energy that they're putting out there.
That's right. Yes,
Oh,
because
yeah.
exactly, because you're going to get more of what you already have.
Right.
Exactly. So that's another piece of the clearing out old patterns is really taking a good hard look at what has been, how have you been approaching and showing up to things and
Yeah.
and really like finding a new way to embrace what's been. Like I obviously I have regrets, and I have things that I'm like, oh yeah, like maybe that wasn't the best decision, but the reality is there's valuable lessons in that. So you know instead of holding on to that, like what can be gleaned from it, and how can you use those nuggets of those lessons learned
Mm,
to fuel you on your path forward,
I love
right?
that.
Where that gives you more power, and more clarity of how to navigate those decisions more effectively next time.
I love that. So talk a little bit about the rapid resolution therapy. Can you just share with
Yes.
people what that is? I know you've told me a
Yeah,
little bit, and
thank
I'm
you
like,
so much for asking.
yeah.
Yes, I'm really excited about this modality because it is a holistic approach. And it has to do with the fact that how it differs from therapy is that I know therapy is in the title, but it's actually not therapy. Just to be
Okay.
very clear, I'm not a clinician, and one does
Yeah.
not need to be to administer this modality. It differs from therapy in that we just have a conversation and we don't talk about anything from the past. It's just like a headline of what is that somebody would like to shift away from. So it could be pervasive thoughts. It could be some sort of an emotion that just won't let up, like resentment or
What about
anger
behaviors
or
and
grief.
actions
I was
like
just getting to that.
addictions and stuff
I
like
was,
that? Yeah.
yes, I was
Okay.
just getting to that. So it could also be an automatic response, like an action or a lack thereof. So lack thereof would be an example like procrastination, right? An action could be like, for example, oh, when I'm triggered, I start yelling. I don't like to yell, then I feel guilty and ashamed about it, but that's what happens to me when
Hmm.
I get triggered, right? Relapse prevention is another thing that this is really valuable for. And so the beautiful thing about this modality is that it's through storytelling and analogies that we are speaking to the subconscious, because all of our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, we're not actually choosing them, which like blew my mind when I first learned
Yeah,
about that.
I'm an EFT practitioner, so I work in the
Yeah, you
subconscious, and it's
know all about it.
fascinating the stuff that
Right?
shows up. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
So when people learn that and our subconscious doesn't understand linear thinking. Like it's not
Right.
like, oh, 1 + 1 is 2. It doesn't understand that. There's no cause and effect.
Like
There's no
one plus
critical
one is
thinking.
seven point
Right.
A, B, C, D.
Right? With a little purple
Right.
sprinkled
And an
in.
apple.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's just it's very imaginative and therefore analogies and storytelling. I think of it as like our primitive, like our primal, I think of it as like how societies were built, right? Like we sat around a campfire and like maybe there was a drum beat or we told stories or like there's like hieroglyphic, you know, pictures, whatever. Like those are the kinds of things that come to mind.
Yeah.
And so storytelling and analogies is how our subconscious connects the dots. And that's also why it loves to make up stories when all the facts aren't there. So through this modality, we basically bring those stories that the subconscious has made up to light, and we help to see that there isn't actually parallels to that. Like there's not an actual connection. For example, if somebody was in a terrible car accident and it happened to be raining, their subconscious might make them feel like, oh, it's raining, something terrible is going to happen.
Yeah.
Those things are not related, but for the subconscious,
Right.
it connects the dots. So it's those kinds of things. And essentially, any sort of, I will say, perseveration, for lack of a better word, whether it's thoughts, whether it's emotions, whether it's an automatic response in terms of like a behavior or not an action where one would like there to be one. It usually is from some sort of a traumatic event, and we don't always recognize that we've had a traumatic event. It's just a state of being overwhelmed, right?
Mm.
Like it's just a sense of like, oh, I don't really have the tools to cope with this right now, but I'm going to do my best. And so that's how those things get hardwired, those automatic responses. And
Right.
so the mind is just trying to survive first and foremost and then thrive.
Yeah.
And so when it is and activating these responses, it's trying to help us, but it doesn't, it's primitive mind, so it doesn't realize that it's actually not serving us. So bringing these connections to light helps to essentially like shut down the fight or flight response because it's like,
Mm.
oh, nothing is happening to respond to. There's no urgency here. There's not a threat. We're not dying. we can relax. So it's a good way to understand how this works is if you have the experience that you're typing in a Word document and you've typed a sentence and there's like in 10 seconds, like one letter appears and another 10 seconds, another letter appears. You're like, what the heck's going on my computer? And maybe you have like a buddy named Eric who's an engineer and you're like, can you just take a look? And he's like, hey, Maria, did you know you have 37 systems open on your computer? Like on the background. And I'm like, what are they? And he starts to name them and tells me what they do. And I'm like, I have no idea. I didn't even know my computer had that. And he's like, so is it okay
That's
if
what's
I shut
happening in
them?
your brain.
Right. So he's like, is it okay if I shut these down then since you don't need them? And it's like, yes, please. So he shuts them down and everything's working optimally. Right. And
Mm.
that's kind of akin to what's going on in our body, right? Like there's all this stuff that we're accumulating from past experiences that is activating things and processes in our mind. And a lot of them don't need to be activated. So,
How do you use that with your clients
yeah.
in the work that you do?
So, for example, if there is resentment or if
Okay.
there's trust issues, right? If they know they've had some things perhaps from the past that they know they're not completely kind of, for lack of a better word, over, right?
Yeah.
They know that there's still some residual stuff that is coming up, and they can usually tell. They might not be able to like see it exactly like how it gets activated or like that exact moment and tell me exactly what it is, but they can sense that there's some residual stuff coming up from our past relationship. Sometimes it's, they've had an assault in the past and perhaps, or things from their childhood and they're like, oh, my mom did this, like I don't want to repeat these patterns, or I can sense that my kids are being impacted by this and I don't want to do that, or I literally feel like I'm being just like my mom or like my dad, right? And so those are the kinds of things that we can address,
Yeah,
but
you're right.
it's really anything. I mean, I've even worked with clients around financial stuckness, like where they had an upper limit issue and
Yeah.
we were able to break through that. So it's really just a great like tune up.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I love that. And I was wondering because, I work with a lot of clients where a lot of I have some that I work with on relationships
yeah.
but it's really just life, right? Like it's
Yeah.
their business and in relation. I feel like I'm the coach that I'm gonna we're gonna fine tune all areas of your life so that you're running smoothly, right? But
Yeah.
oftentimes when I see patterns, when we
Mhm.
really peel it back, it has to do with like their upbringing,
Yes.
their family,
Hmm.
their relationship with their mom, with their dad, with their
Yeah.
I've had conversations with clients. I'm like, so you told me this happened, and now you're telling me this happened, and these are the same things. So where there's a pattern here,
Yeah.
and you're the common denominator. So let's figure that out,
Right.
right? And it comes from that like the past behavior. So, uh,
Yeah.
I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Uh,
like you said, like we have to clean it up, right? Like I tell
yeah,
my daughter all the time, unfortunately, I'm like, there's no shortcut, sweetheart. Like you have to trudge through the muck, and you have to clean it up. The beautiful thing about rapid resolution therapy, though, is that there's no trudging through the muck. It's actually quite pleasant
yeah,
because we don't go through all the details. And again, with the storytelling and the analogies, like we're not like sitting there peeling apart, oh, that horrible experience you had, like let's dig into all the pieces. Like
right.
no, we just talk about the similarities to like the story, or like this is a way to think about it. And it's really amazing. There's also some breath work and some imagery that is
Okay.
involved, so people report, yeah, having a pleasant experience. Some people even say like that was a lot of fun, which is unusual considering some of the subject matter
Yeah.
we're talking about.
I love that.
Yeah.
I know there's in the last few years, there's kind of this new thing where the parents switch homes and the kids
Mm.
stay in. And there's even a sitcom. I don't know if it's still on, but there was a sitcom with John Cryer last year that was the
Oh,
premise, right?
okay.
That the kids stay and the parents
Yes.
leave.
Hmm.
Have you been coming across that? And do you find that that gives the kids more stability? Is there value in that? Like what is that? Where did that come from?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I actually have not worked with parents who have that situation. However, I've heard of it.
Yeah,
I would imagine that it does give kids a lot more stability because then they can, right, like they're in the same space. They get to always be around their friends in the community, around their events, around their school, and whatever extracurriculars are happening. So, and it probably gives them a sense of, well, I'm in my home and I have access to both of my parents, right? Maybe
yeah.
not simultaneously, but at least, right, it still feels like home and I get to spend time with each of them versus, and maybe it even feels a little like, mom or dad like went on a business trip.
Well, and it feels like it's the parents actually putting the kids
Right,
first too, right?
right,
Like
right.
it feels healthier in
Yeah. That way,
what do
yeah,
we need to
the
do?
parents are the ones adjusting rather than the kids having to adjust to
Right.
with the parents.
Because
Although,
I mean, there's so many different ways that parents do it.
yes,
There's 5 days, 3 day weekend, whatever, every other
yes,
weekend, right? So,
yeah, yeah,
um,
absolutely. There's lots of options.
what is something that you would say to somebody who's maybe going through this now, that's either going through, I guess it's two questions. Someone maybe recently divorced, recently separated, or recently becoming a step parent, or dating somebody with children.
So for recently divorced, I would say do not ever badmouth. This is actually true for everybody. Do not ever badmouth the other parent. Just don't. Just don't.
Or the
Do
parent's
not do it.
partner, I would imagine too.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
don't. Well, ideally, yes. But at the very least, do not under any circumstances badmouth the other parent,
Yeah,
whether you're the parent and you feel that you have the right to. I mean, there's other places for you to go and have those conversations, right? Like you have friends, you have families, you have, I don't know, there's support groups, there's
sure.
professionals, but do not do it because what it actually does is unknowingly it creates a rift between you and your child because the child is have the other parent and they're going to have a natural tendency to defend them But
Right.
now it's like, oh, well, if you think dad's bad, do you think I'm bad too? And
Yeah.
it plants that seed of doubt. And yeah, it just really puts them in the middle. It's very confusing
Feels
and
icky.
feels very icky. And
Yeah.
sadly, that kind of impact that lasts for a long time for kids. It doesn't
Yeah.
just go away. And so that's one thing. I think the other piece is, again, we've talked about this before, is, really trying to let go of the resentment and just trying to embrace, like, things are going to be rocky, right? Like, you're moving into a new chapter, having grace for yourself, having grace for your kids. It's really hard for them. Definitely making time to talk to them about the situation, again, in an age appropriate way. More importantly, just to, like, help them understand that it is painful and it's okay to be sad, and that feelings will move through and that things will get easier, and that it's okay that there's so many things up in the air right now, that you're there and you'll figure it out, and that just reassuring them that, you guys are still a family, even though that looks different now.
Would you
Um,
recommend therapy for children of divorce or some support
I
that isn't a
think
parent?
I think support is definitely useful. It can be useful. I think it depends on the situation. But I think one really important component that people often overlook is they're like, oh, they have therapy, they're fine. But it's like, no, they still really need you as their parent
Oh,
to
yeah,
be having
absolutely.
these
Yeah.
conversations with them, because first of all, know them like the back of your hand because you've been there all along. And a therapist just won't. They will
Right.
have other information they can impart, but they won't necessarily know all the ins and outs of your kid. Sometimes a kid will show the therapist what they want them to see, and that's not necessarily the full picture. Because kids are really, really smart and they
Yeah.
adapt extremely well and they're clever, and they test boundaries and all sorts of things. So I would just simply say, yes, supports are great. They are not a substitute for
For the parent.
having the
Absolutely. Yeah.
conversations with the parent
Yeah.
and the parent being involved and supporting them through the kids through the entire process.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to the person dating? Yours
Yes,
didn't work when
this
you
next
tried to
one.
convince your husband to not
Yes,
date you. So if
yes.
that doesn't work for somebody, what advice would you
I
give
I
them?
would say ideally, and naturally, there's all kinds of situations, right? Like, not everything's going to be planned, not everything goes according to plan. If at all possible, meet the kids when things are serious, right? And giving them that heads up, checking for their primary parent to check with them and say, look, I'm thinking about dating. What do you think about that? Just really, like, walking them through that. And it's sort of a nuanced process, because on the one hand, it is about creating space and really hearing them when they say whatever their feelings might be. They might totally not be ready. They might be extremely upset. It's also, though, about helping them to move along towards embracing that those steps forward, but not rushing them through it. And
Mm,
most importantly, kids, just, if they're not ready, like, don't keep inviting the person over. Like, making sure that there's plenty of one-on-one time for the parent and the
yeah.
children without the new significant other, even if things are going swimmingly, making sure of that anyway, because your child won't feel comfortable necessarily sharing things in front of the new person, number one. But number two, if there feels like that person is always around, they're going to get the sense that you don't have time for them anymore, or
Right.
that you're over the relationship, the one-on-one time, and you're now just committed to this individual. And again, it doesn't make logical sense, but that's how a kid's brain works. And
Right.
they won't have the language to be able to even identify it for themselves, and they won't be able to communicate it to you. So
Yeah.
it's really about the parent recognizing that and checking. And that's why I say lots of check-ins and really naming the stuff that might be hard, because the kid is having a hard time identifying it. Like, it's there. They just don't know how to name it. They don't know how to put the language to it.
Yeah. I know I've had conversations with friends where they've said, I don't want to date somebody. And even when I did the matchmaking, I don't want to date
Yeah.
someone because I want to be number one in their life. Right.
Hmm.
And my take is, I think your child is always going to be number one. Right. So,
Yes.
how do you help the step parent or the new person really
Yeah.
navigate that, and
Yeah.
also have the parent navigate that? Yeah, there is this person that, how do you
Yes.
manage that time? Because that's important, right? To nurture
Absolutely.
that new relationship.
Absolutely. I think it's really coming down to managing expectations, right? And yeah, I am very transparent with new step parenting clients. Like this, these kids are going to come first. And are you okay with that? Are you prepared for that? Are you ready
Right.
to take that on? Because that is what the reality of the situation is. You're going to have to give sometimes, and your needs or priorities won't necessarily be the ultimate priority. Are you okay with that? Like what do you need, right? And for the parent too, to remember, like again, they have a responsibility to their kids. Yes, there's this new relationship, but so how can they navigate that, right? What does their specific situation look like? What is available to them to be able to nurture that relationship with the new partner while also putting the kids first?
Yeah.
That's really important. That's a big
Nice.
key component.
What is something that someone might hear or actually maybe experience themselves, but hear in a conversation from a friend or a loved one or somebody who's going through this so
Hmm.
that they know that they may be able to refer to you like, hey,
Yes.
you need to talk to Maria. Like
Yeah.
how would somebody know that they need you?
Yeah. So I think if they are having the experience, and this is true for either the step parent or the divorced parent, like they're feeling like there's a force field between them and their child or them and their stepchild, that is a good time to to come and talk to me. If they're feeling just totally isolated and cold and alone, that's also a really good time to come and talk to me.
Okay.
If they are feeling like they and their partner are watching the same movie, but for one, it's a horror, and for the other, it's a dark comedy or something along those lines, that's a really good time to come and talk to me also. And yeah, and we can just kind of get clarity on what's what, where things are at, and how I might be able to support them. And at the very least, they'll come out of the conversation knowing their next best step.
I love that. I love that. And you work with both step parents and divorced parents, right? So
Yes.
you don't need to be a step parent to be feeling this.
Correct. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's hard. Like sometimes after divorce, maybe in the marriage, there either wasn't room or for whatever reason, people fell into a dynamic where one parent was doing all the things, maybe having to do with like school and the extracurricular with the kids, and the other one was maybe just like working more or involved with other areas of life. And so people kind of fell into their roles, but that's not necessarily what they A wanted. And B, now that they're divorcing, like they want to take on more ownership and be more involved, but they just don't know how, right? Or perhaps they're feeling like their kids are not letting them, right? And that could
Mm,
be there could be something there, and obviously kids are going through a lot at this time. So all of those things are great reasons to come and talk to me and kind of explore what's going on, and what where we can make a real difference for their situation, because who doesn't want more ease and peace and joy to actually
right?
enjoy their family?
I'm not even divorced or a step parent, and I want that in my life,
Right?
right? Of course. So
Yeah.
you have an offer to share with everyone. Do you want to talk a little bit about the 6 steps to collaborative co-parenting?
Yes. Yes, it is
And
a
we'll put all the
guide.
links in the show notes, so you don't
Yes.
have to give
Thank
that,
you.
but yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited about this guide because I think it gives some really necessary sort of like what I call like almost like guiding principles for the blend, right? And for the relationships, because I think there's a lot of questions about what the dynamic should look like between the parents who are no longer together, between the new step parent, right? And so it has all of that, but plus there's a lot of tips around like self-care and around, how to navigate the dynamic, how to navigate difficult conversations, how to navigate relationships between kids, especially if both people in the relationship have kids, because there may be different rules for the different sets of kids because maybe they're both bouncing around between homes. So just how to navigate all of that. It's a lot. Plus the extended family, like just how to really build community and relationships with them. And it's a whole world unto itself.
Nice.
And yeah, so I've gotten a lot of great feedback on it, and I know that it would be really valuable for somebody who's in this boat or thinking about kind of delving into dating someone with kids.
Perfect. And we'll put the link to that and all your social and your website and everything in the
Thank
show
you.
notes. I always like to end with asking this one question. What is something that you live by that you want to share with our listeners?
Ooh, I think I live. I really try to live intentionally.
Hmm.
That's been like the thing that I've been leaning into, like asking myself, like, does this bring me joy? Is this moving me forward towards what I want to be doing? Or is this just sucking up my time, my energy? Am I being someone I don't ultimately want to be?
I
So
love
that's,
that.
I
I
use that
love
as a
that.
guidepost.
Yeah, I have a friend that is an artist and she does everything with intention and I'm trying to do something artistic right now.
Hmm.
Kind of to not really,
That's
but she said,
exciting.
don't forget, set the intention. I was like, thank
Yes.
you for that reminder because everything she does, she sets an intention when she's doing it.
Yes.
And I love that. So all right. So, oh my God, this has been so amazing. We could continue to see. This is what
I
happens when
know.
you and I get together. We could just keep talking. But at the beginning of each call, each episode, I pull three cards and I have three
Okay.
in front of me.
Okay.
So I'm going to let you choose the first one. So we've got left, center, and right. And these come from the Moonology deck.
Awesome.
So I'm going to have you choose left,
Okay.
center, or right.
Center.
Center. All right. Mm, focus.
Ooh, okay.
Just focus. And oftentimes there's themes when I love I don't look at these, so
Hmm.
it's fun for me. So the card on the left is communicate, which we've talked a
Okay.
lot about today, right?
Yes. Yes.
And the card on the right is meant to be. And I love the fact that there are three people in that.
I love
They're actually,
that.
I think, angels, but
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So that almost feels like if, for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see it, but if you're just listening, there's three people and one in the middle, and it almost feels like, the parents and the child in the middle, and the child's got their arm, the person in the middle has their arms out. So I love that they're always somehow tied into the conversation
Yes.
we're having. So
Beautiful.
Maria, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so much fun. I feel like we could continue this conversation. Maybe we'll do another one down the road.
Yes, please.
Um, and
This
thank you. Go ahead.
this was awesome. Just thank you so much. Thank you for being you. Thank you for creating this space and for your very insightful questions. That was awesome. It was really enjoyable and I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
And for those of you listening, thank you for joining me on today's journey towards a more enlightened and fulfilling life. I really hope that today's episode has inspired you to embrace your inner wisdom and navigate your path with a renewed sense of purpose. Remember, transformation begins from within. Take a moment each day to connect with your higher self and trust that the universe is guiding you towards your highest good. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with others who might be on their journey and can benefit from this message. Your support really helps us reach more souls on their spiritual journey. Stay connected with our community. All of the social media links, mine and Maria's, will be in the show notes. You can visit my website at foreverchangecoaching.com for all kinds of resources. I have a resource on there to find out if you are ready for your next big ass up level. There's some journal prompts for you to answer. And until next time, continue to shine your light and walk in peace and love. I am Francine Tirrell, and this has been Effin' Fridays with Francine. Have a fabulous weekend.